Hi, I'm Donnie. I'm Trinidadian Costa Rican.
Hi, I'm Rhonda. I'm Afro-Honduran. And we are
We're
your
co-hosts for
Negra
Como Soy, or I am Afro-Latina. Every Tuesday, we'll bring you the insights, perspectives, and history of the African diaspora in Latin America.
To educate, enlighten, and hopefully create a sense of belonging for you, our listeners and viewers.
Negra Como Soy is brought to you by Cultures, the global multicultural magazine. Cultures celebrates cross-cultural identity because everyone should feel like they matter. Randa, ¿qué tal? ¿Qué tal?
¿Cómo estás? Hi, everybody.
¿Cómo estás hoy?
Estoy muy bien.
¿Sí?
Un poquito frío aquí en Tucson. It's a little cold.
She's a little bit cold. Because, see, and I thought about you the other day. Because, okay, y'all, Rhonda does not like the colds. And I was in Phoenix with her. She's in Phoenix, Arizona, USA right now. And I was in Phoenix with her. And I said, it's cold here. She's like, it's not cold.
Yes.
Today it's cold.
Right. Well, Rhonda, it's 30 degrees right now in Houston, Texas, and we don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Everything is shut down right now. No schools, stores closed. Right?
Yeah, there's a freeze going across down here. I don't know why. I was telling my friends in Colorado, can y'all keep your weather to yourself, please?
I don't believe that's the Colorado weather. Though I must say, I'm in Colorado right now. I will not be in a few days. I'll be in Colombia in a bathing suit. However, at the moment, there is snow on the rooftops. This is the coldest winter I've seen in a while. It's still not that bad though. The sun's out. I mean, I haven't really worn a coat, but it's not, you know, you're not going to stand out there without your coat for a long time. So nice to see you all, Dr. Paulette. It's wonderful to have you back again.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
If you all remember, and if you haven't seen or heard her last episode about not parent expected, we called it No Longer Latina, ? You must go back and listen or watch. So today we're going to continue with that and talk to Dr. Paulette about her experiences with a DNA test and finding out that her parents weren't who she thought they were. Well, no, one parent was, the other parent was not. And the effect of that, and also this was her Latino parents. So, you know, how that changed her ethnic identity and how she's handling that, and then what she's done to make a difference in the world since then. So welcome, Dr. Paulette.
Hi. Thank you for that introduction, Donnie. And you know, and I will share in terms of not just my experience, but this, you know, tons and tons of people who are going through this. In some cases, it is turning out that it's both parents are not the parents. For people who had no idea they were adopted or were donor conceived, then very often it's not just one parent, it's two. So it's been quite the experience, but thank you. You know, thank you so much for bringing me on to talk about this, because I think as the commercial DNA tests become more popular, we're going to have more and more people having the direct experience like I did with the shock, with the surprise, what I call a DNA surprise. So, you know, in terms of your viewing audience, there are going to be days when people either decide to take a commercial test for fun and have this discovery, or they begin to learn because they get contacted by someone who has made this discovery and saying, hi, I took a DNA test and apparently you're my half-sister or my half-brother, right? So I recognize now that it multiplies in terms of complexity when you have this DNA surprise experience.
So, okay, tell us a little bit about your background, how you grew up and what it was like. Dr. Rhonda also grew up in New Orleans. And Dr. Rhonda, we just saw Dr. Paulette's sister, who's going back to New Orleans today.
Oh, wow.
Or she's saying no.
Okay.
You're right. She's back there somewhere. We'll be sneaking out shortly. So, of course, I'm sorry if you're from New Orleans. I have to say.
I grew up uptown. I went to school all over the place. So, high school, I was at Xavier Prep for my freshman year, and then I ended up at Rob Williams for my last 3 years.
Okay. All right. So my freshman year is at St. Mary's Academy, and then I
Okay.
switched over to Marian Abramson. So, yeah. All right. You can cut that part out, but we know why I asked that question. Fantastic. So then Dr. Rhonda would know about that melting pot culture called New Orleans, and it's historical, right? It's historical. It's like a lot of Latin American, countries where you had this, people coming from all kinds of backgrounds. You had the slaves that were introduced to New Orleans, and then you had just about every kind of country imaginable coming together. And so the culture, I think part of the beauty of the culture is that you can feel the French influence, you can feel the Spanish influence, you can feel the African influence, you can feel the Asian influence, where all these groups came together, and in many cases literally came together to form
That's
one
great.
culture. Uh, so that's the background that I grew up in. And then, and most specifically was then in terms of my mother's marriage, her first marriage, to the person whom I believe to be, who I was told was my
What
biological birth
happened?
father. So,
How did you feel? I mean, I can only imagine how you felt when you found out that your father, who you thought was your father, and you grew up with a stepfather whom you loved.
I grew up with a stepfather, and I was not very close to my Martinez
Yeah.
family. I had, I was around them some, but not really,
You think that
right?
was
And
helpful when you found out that this was not your father?
not initially, because I was just so traumatized and so shocked. You know, I think I shared with you privately, Donnie, that I didn't realize that I hadn't been looking at myself in the mirror until one day I looked at myself in the mirror, and and I'm touching and examining, like my eyes, and then it dawned on me. I had been coming in doing my morning routine, washing my face, brushing my teeth, putting my jewelry on, combing my hair, but not really looking at me as part of that traumatizing shock.
Wow. So after you found this,
I couldn't, I couldn't face what I was seeing in the mirror, because now all of a sudden I'm going, um, all those Latino features I saw, all those Latina, features that I saw, are they there really? Right? Um, oh wow, I have pictures of the new family now. I see my face in those pictures, right?
I
Yeah. There was a whole identity, and I think I shared with you, I started calling it an identity disruption, because I no longer really knew or understood what my identity was and how I wanted to reclassify how I saw myself.
now, how
Right?
did your Martinez family take this?
Okay. Well, ironically, and I think I shared also, but ironically, one of my Martinez cousins had called me before I actually took the test to share with me about the DNA test confirming the indigenous Native American ancestry percentages. And then she also shared with me that she was going to be doing a DNA test for my, now I call him my birth certificate father, right? And then the day I got my results, within minutes of me getting the results and recognizing there was an issue, she called me, right? And she asked me how I was doing, and I think, and I remember her asking me how I was doing, and I could hear it in her voice. And I told her I wasn't doing well. And then she said, "Well, I was calling to tell you I got my uncle's DNA results." And I remember going, "Oh, really? Is that what he is now? Your uncle? What happened to, I got your father's DNA results?" But at that moment, I knew she was looking at his results, and she knew also, right? And she did confirm that she had gotten his results back, and that I was not in his DNA results, all right? And so we ended up agreeing, because she was really close to him, we ended up agreeing that he should hear this from her as opposed to me, in terms of his treatment, because he's in his 90s now, right? And so she did let him know, and then she called me and she said, I was actually surprised, because she knew we weren't that close, right? She said, I was actually surprised. He had no idea that you were not his child. And he broke down crying.
Oh,
And then he wanted to know, how is she doing? Is she okay with finding this news out?
oh, that's
So he's now deceased, but he probably stayed more connected with me when he found out he wasn't my birth father than when he thought he was.
wow.
That was an interesting shift, also.
So so he was more connected with you after. Did he call you? What happened
hmm
next?
So for me, so that was early on, and then of course, like a lot of people that go through this experience, and it's like going through the grief process or going through a trauma cycle. And for me, it was more the trauma cycle than the grief. I think the grief came much later for me. But I didn't go into denial. You know how they say when it first comes out, you go into denial. It was kind of hard to go into denial because I'm looking at this piece of paper that's telling me, right, that this test says you're not who you thought you were. So I spent a good bit of time in that shock stage, right? That numbness of having a new reality, recognizing that my story is no longer the same. And if my story is no longer the same, what is my story now? Right? And so, and then as time went on and I wasn't doing really well, I got up in the middle of the night one night and went and sat at, I remember, with my husband's desk, and I had been exposed to a trauma model. And I took that trauma model and I started writing over it and adding pieces that helped me to make sense of my
Like a
experience,
scientific trauma model.
like a scientific trauma model. And so then I called the person that had created and developed that trauma model and talked to them about it and said, will you go over with me to see if what I'm doing makes sense, right? To help explain what my process is. And what I began to also look at using that model is, and what are the stages and steps that I will be going through in this experience. And then I got invited to speak at the very first Not Parent Expected, they called it a conference retreat. And I presented my model and I told them it was a work in progress, and I wasn't doing it through an academic institution, but this is something, a tool I had developed to help me make sense of my experience. And as I was presenting the model, mouths were dropping open, people were crying and sharing with me that how they were feeling was finally making sense to them. Um, and that in some ways it helped them to know, well, you don't want to wish this on anyone, like a lot of trauma experiences, right? But it helped them to know I'm not alone, right? And she just gave us something that helps us be able to look and see, this is where I am in this process, and that it's giving me hope that one day I'll look up and I'll be in acceptance. One of the things I put in the model was basically, and then to want to help other people who are going through this process. And they really love the piece of knowing that one day they'll wake up and they'll want to advocate for people going through this experience.
So,
Right.
in a brief explanation, can you tell us a little bit more about the model? Would it help people, or do you have to a, have a whole session so people can understand? Because I can imagine there's probably some listeners and viewers who are sitting here traumatized right now and wanting to know, you know, tell me, what is this? How can this help me? So, is there a way to briefly describe that?
Just briefly, so with the trauma model, I just go through. The first stage is grief. Well, some people the grief is immediate, and other people the grief comes later. I realized my grief came a little bit later, but the first stage would be the shock. For some people, the denial. This cannot be happening to me, but it is. So the shock and denial piece, and then I didn't put bargaining like you see in a lot of models. So as opposed to putting bargaining, my next step or stage was coming to terms with this is really real, right? And then moving into is it hope, some acceptance, right? And of course, for different people, like with any kind of, and I really don't like to call it a stage model because I don't consider it a stage model. I see it as more circular because you can be moving along and then all of a sudden, you find out there's another sibling or you find out some other little piece of information. There are people who end up finding out that their parent was raped. Okay, so when you find out that you're a product of rape, then you slide all the way back to shock, before you start moving again into moving forward. So I always share with people, this is not a stage model where, okay, I've gotten this part done, so now here, and then I've gotten that part done, is that depending upon your circumstances, and you may skip over one of the steps that I put in this particular model. So I see it more as a circular, but that one day, hopefully, as you continue to go through, that you will get to that stage of, okay, this is real, this happened now. And now that I have accepted and worked with the fact that my sense of self is forever changed, right? And then getting to the acceptance of this is a new me. And actually, and Donnie, I know you'll recognize the thing with the new normal. I end up calling that stage the new normal stage, right? That there's a new me, and I may even like the new me better because you often hear people say, I always knew something was off, right? I always knew something was off. I had no idea that this was it. But I always had this nagging sense of something's not right. And you hear that over and over.
And you and I discussed this because you had said that to me before you found out this information that something wasn't quite right. But I think when we all think we know who we are, you kind of blow that off. Oh, I'm just a little different than my family. I know my ex-husband used to say, hopefully nobody in my family is listening to this, but he used to say to me, oh God, they are your people, but they're not your kind. And for a while, I remember, because I used to be like, what are you talking about? Like, these are my siblings. This is my family. And he was trying to say that I'm so different than the rest of them. And it's interesting, though, because for me, I look exactly like my parents. So, if I get a DNA test back and something, I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I would do.
And one of my friends said, well, can you send me a picture of the man that you thought was your father, right? So I sent her a picture. She went, oh, no, excuse me, you look exactly like that man, right? And then I sent her a picture of who I discovered was actually my birth father. And she went, on second thought, you don't look like the other guy. You look just like your birth father. And so how the perceptions are is, I think for her, I think there was a perception of, but she looks like this man. Until she saw the actual person. And then she went, oh, I take that back. You look exactly like your birth father. Exactly. So I looked enough like the man I believed to be my biological father that I never questioned it. When I would go around the family, I looked around, I saw other people that looked like me, but as Dr. Rhonda knows, we have all kinds of looks and types in New Orleans, right? And so, and then even though I found out I'm no longer a Martinez, my mother has Portuguese and Spanish ancestry, right? So there is that still in my makeup, right? But I saw a person whose parent was Latino when I looked in the mirror.
And I think
until I didn't.
I think people,
right?
We talked about this in the last episode, but you want to be able to draw those references and find an anchoring, right? And that
Right.
happens as far as, people seeing themselves or seeing you in other people when they need to. So with
Exactly.
each of my kids, when they're with me, oh my gosh, your children look exactly like you. And I'm like, wait till you, yeah. And then dad comes and they're like, oh, I mean, well, they still kind of look like you, but no, dad's face is just all over.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
it's how
And
you
so, and I think, we want to fit in, we want to belong, in the whole TCK world, a lot of it is about that belonging. Where do I belong and where do I fit? And so I had my belonging place, even though I wasn't close to them. But in all honesty, I always knew it was different than like my sister that was talking before you got on, Dr. Rhonda. She was chatting with us for a minute before we got started. Is we always knew, well, this sibling has a different dad. So she's gonna be different than us. And so it was always kind of accepted, well, she's kind of not like us because she's kind of not like us. But then when I would go around my Martinez family, I never felt like I fit. But I wrote it off to, well, I'm not around them a lot. I'm being raised by my stepdad, right? And so I wrote it off to, well, okay, so I'm not around them a lot, so that makes sense until I met my birth family and I was blown away because my personality, I just slid right in. And when I'm around them, I feel congruent. I don't know if that makes sense, but and again, a lot of people have this experience of, for the first time, I felt normal.
Wow.
I have a guy that I team up with to train around this, and he is like 6'5" and red hair and very fair skin and very blue eyes, and his dad was like 5'4" and black hair and black eyes and kind of ruddy complexion. And that didn't mean that wasn't his father, but he said, my whole life, all my other siblings are kind of short and stocky and dark hair and black eyes like my dad, and then there's me, right? So when he finds out, and in his case, he started hearing rumors, right? But he said it was amazing, even though I heard the rumors, I was still stunned, utterly shocked. And then he did go to meet his birth family, and all of the fellas are 6'5" and red hair and blue eyes. And he discovers he's from a Scandinavian background, right? So it's like all of a sudden how I look fits. How I am fits more.
So,
Because of course you still have all the other influences.
right.
But there's something about it where when I did finally meet my new family, it just, I felt like, oh, I kind of belong in this group of people over here.
So
You know?
there's that whole piece looking like, because we talk about this. So for listeners and viewers who heard Dr. Paulette use the term TCK, we'll put a definition down below of third culture kid. You've heard me refer to it before as well. And those are people who grow up globally. So they're culturally fluid and geographically mobile. I'm an adult TCK. Dr. Rhonda has some TCK tendencies. And it really affects how you see your world. So for me, you're scaring me a little bit, Dr. Paulette, all the things that you're saying, because I never really feel like I fit, and I know that's not the reason, but just some of the things that we talked about earlier, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to take one of these tests. But it's interesting because when you're around people who, for instance, family, if you grew up around your family, which I didn't for the most part, you can feel like you belong because these are your people, right? So if you don't belong there too, then where, right? So that feeling of not quite fitting because you don't think like growing up as a TCK, let's say in multiple countries, you may not think like the people around you. Often you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even worse if you look like them. So it's a hidden diversity where people expect you to think like they do because you look like them, but you're thinking completely differently. So you actually
Exactly.
are able to interact and feel more comfortable with the people who you think like than the people that you look like, right?
Right. And exactly. And I think in a way, Donnie, hidden diversity in this NPE experience is you grow up knowing I don't exactly think like everyone else. I don't, there's something, I feel that something's different in me. I'm different. And so you start finding all the reasons for why I might be different, right? And then you find out, oh, biologically, and we always have conversations around nature versus nurture in this group, right? I've become a firm believer in the influence of nature, right? Because I have some inherent ways of being that I'm learning when I do go around my new family, is that that's part of my natural personality that came to me through the gift of DNA.
Yes.
Now it feels a little more congruent because I have is that why? I'm this way. Is that why I think a little differently than other members of my family?
So, you spoke a little bit too, and I'm going to take a second to speak about definitions right now. So, people often wonder what's the difference between Latino and Hispanic. So, Hispanic typically refers to language. So, anywhere that speaks the Spanish language, which would include Spain, but not Brazil because they speak Portuguese, right? And Latin or Latino usually refers to everything in Latin America, which is south of the United States, right? So, or including Brazil. I had to keep it straight in my head, and so I bring that up, one, because a lot of people aren't clear and use them interchangeably, but two, so you still have your Spanish heritage, your Hispanic
In
heritage,
terms of DNA, yes.
and
Right.
you no
Right.
longer, in terms of DNA, have your Latin heritage. So, from an ethnic viewpoint, and from a way that you saw yourself and your identity, your ethnicity, did that change at all? Was that a shock? Because I don't, it's such a big point for me. I'm so proud of the fact that my father's from Costa Rica. So if that had changed, um,
That's a
yeah.
change, even though, as I shared during our last session, I did not grow up very much around my family. I still, that was part of my heritage. That was part of who I was, and I embraced it. And I love that that was a part of who I was, even though my cultural experiences, my cultural milieu was not within a Latino context, right? But I embraced that I'm a Martinez and everything that I felt came with it. And what I did know was in my family, there was a lot of pride around being a Martinez, right? But when I realized that the one thing that I really embraced as part of who I am was not really, from a heritage standpoint, a part of who I am, that's where the identity impacts really did come in. That's where the identity disruption, because if I'm not that, and remember initially I didn't know who the birth father was. That came later, right? So I had this period of time of feeling in suspense. And, Dr. Rhonda, you talked about the anchor, and my very first thought was, yeah, that's like somebody pulled my anchor up, and I'm just out there drifting in the ocean with no destination because I'm lost at sea. That was the emotion of just feeling adrift. Of, okay, now I know who I no longer am, but I had a period of time then, who am I? Where do I fit? Do I have a family? And then in my case, I ended up having a cousin who saw me there, and it said I was his first cousin, and he's like, uh, message, hi, according to Ancestry DNA, you and I are first cousins. Who are you? I laugh about it now. I wasn't laughing when I got it, but and he and I are very close now. So that's part of the gift is I have this new wonderful cousin who just happens to live in Houston.
Oh wow, that's
That's
incredible.
wonderful. That's wonderful.
Right. Well, he's just been a wonderful gift. He helped stand by. I had my husband on one side and him on the other side holding my hand while I tried to navigate this. And because he had access to the family, we were eventually able to put the pieces together. Right. And then he made the introduction of me into the family. Right. And some people, the introduction is an absolute disaster. Mine is a mixed bag. Right? But instead of me focusing on the pieces that aren't working, I focus on where I am accepted in the new family and learning about the family and going around them and seeing bits and pieces of me in there. So it began to help me re-anchor, right?
That's such an
um,
amazing
and
story.
begin to say, wait, the really actually kind of cool thing at this is at my age, I get to reinvent myself and I get to recreate it in a way that I like. And with the new family, I can grab the pieces I really love and not worry about the other pieces. And so it's all potential for me now,
Ooh, I
right?
like that. It's all potential. Well,
It's all
so
potential
as we
for me
wrap
now.
up, we have a few seconds left. What's next? Where do you go from here with your new potential?
My new potential is I am working with other people who are going through this experience to help them better understand what's happening. I'm part of a project right now where we are trying to get the academic world to understand that this is a very real experience, kind of like with the TCK um, initially, where people didn't recognize that this is real, this matters, and so we're doing it. I'm actually on a dissertation committee right now for a young woman who is doing her dissertation research on the NPE experience, and so we've been linking up with researchers that are beginning to take a look at this, and no big surprise, most researchers are catching how important the identity piece is in this, and so we're looking forward to getting more research and information out there, getting therapists trained to understand that this really is a very traumatizing experience. You know, I've been in this experience for 3 years now, and so my being able to say it's all potential, that's a 3-year journey, right? This didn't. Probably the first year of my life, I stayed in the state of numb. At that stage of disbelief. Not that I denied it, but still disbelief that this was happening to me. And so, hopefully, my next is to, in terms of the NPE experience, is just to hopefully be a part of the movement that this is real. We've been told that it's being estimated about 20% of the people that take the commercial DNA test will discover that they are an NPE. That's a lot of people. Right now, that estimate is somewhere between 1 and 2 million people have made the discovery that they are not who they thought they were.
Wow.
That the parent that they expected to be their parent or parents were not.
Well, I thank you, Dr.
So,
Paulette, and I'm so glad that your experience will serve as a resource for other people out there and that you've created this model. And I look forward to seeing and hearing what you do with that, because I know you do have a podcast coming up where you will tell stories. And so I look forward to hearing more and seeing all the people that you do help. So thank you.
all right, thank you. Thank you again for having me back. I appreciate it. And hopefully, this podcast will serve as a resource for other people to know that they don't have to be alone, that there are other people out there that get it, that understand it, and that there is a Facebook group for people who discover that they are NPEs. So, if you are one of the people out in the audience that's gone through this, look it up on Facebook. We right now have about 12,000 members in that Facebook group.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you.
Adios.
Ciao.